All right, Mark, the red light is on. This is when all the pressure starts to set in. I hope you're not nervous, right? You're okay?
I'm incredibly nervous.
Yeah, I understand. It's high pressure podcast interviews here. So, well, let's start off with a quick sound check. Why don't you tell my listeners what you had for breakfast this morning?
I actually had some fresh bread from Panera's with butter and honey, and it's one of my favorite things in the world to eat.
Yeah, that sounds tasty. Honey is always good, man.
Delicious.
I love, it's honey is really good, on almost anything. It's really nice.
It's delicious. Well, now you don't want to hear this, but I when I was younger, back in 1820, I worked on a farm in Norway, and we used to drive up into the Norwegian mountains and get fresh bread from a local bakery, but also the butter and the honey from those little villages. So the cows, you thought we were talking about crowdfunding?
No,
let's talk about crowdfunding.
Let's get into it. Yeah.
The cows graze up in the mountain pastures and eat the wildflowers. And so their milk, and therefore the butter from the milk, has this wonderful sweet taste. And the honey from up there, because the bees are just grazing on all this multitude of all different species of wildflowers. It's unbelievable.
I bet.
So
yeah,
every time I have bread and butter and honey, that's what I'm thinking about.
That's a nice thought. I'm not thinking that. My grandpa was a beekeeper, so I have this this secret love of at some point I'm going to not do a podcast with headphones on and be a beekeeper. I don't know when, but at some point in my life, I'll do that because I think I love the art form of it, the whole thing, everything about it.
Fantastic. And the smoke, you do the smoke and then the bees move in a big hive and you go capture them. It's a cool thing.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, I think we got our sound check in. That's good.
Okay,
we're sounding solid. Well, why don't you tell my listeners a little bit about who you are, what you do, and why we're talking today.
Well, who I am. My name is Mark Roderick, and I'm an incredibly serious lawyer who never jokes about anything. I'm a corporate and securities lawyer, actually, and for the last 150 years or so, I've been representing entrepreneurs and their businesses in all kinds of things, sort of startup law, but a lot of real estate development. And when you do that, you help people raise capital because, entrepreneurs always looking for capital. And then fast forward until about 7 years ago now, time flies, but the Jobs Act came on the horizon, this law that created crowdfunding. And so when I saw that law on the horizon, I said, this is going to be super cool. And disruptive and transformative and democratize our broken capital formation system. And so I decided this is really where I'm going to focus my attention. And as a result, crowdfunding is basically all I've been doing for the last 7 years. So that's what I do. I do crowdfunding, help people raise money, help crowdfunding portals get set up, and everything in between. So that's who I am and what I do.
That's great. So what was it back 7 years ago outside of just seeing the law, but what is it that at the core sort of started drawing you to this in terms of focusing on this for your job and stuff? Like what were you seeing behind the scenes?
Yeah, great question. So if you have ever tried pre-crowdfunding to raise capital in this country, how hard it is. Mm-hmm. And it depended, I'm using the past tense, it depended on private networks, meaning whom do you know? You want to raise money. In fact, Jeff Bezos just came out recently, not with the National Enquirer stuff.
Yeah, not that one.
But he was recently talking about he had to raise his first $1 million, for this thing that became Amazon, and it was the hardest $1 million he ever raised. And the way you had to do it is you had to start calling people. You'd call your lawyer, your accountant, your friend, your mother, your cousin, your uncle. Do you want to invest? Do you want to invest? And then they'd call maybe the people they knew.
Mm-hmm.
And it depended on where you lived. You know, if you live in Manhattan or Silicon Valley, a heck of a lot easier to raise capital than if you live in Idaho.
Mm-hmm.
And it depended on, you know, literally who your father is, who your mother is. Do they belong to the country club? What's your socioeconomic class? This series of disjointed, opaque, inefficient, expensive private networks. So, and I am about to answer your question. When I saw the Jobs Act, so for the first time in history, the Jobs Act, crowdfunding, allows you to advertise, and in particular, to advertise online, to use the internet to raise capital. And it immediately clicked for me that, wow, just as we use the internet to do everything in our lives, and seems like every day something more, whether it's shopping on Amazon or ordering food or making travel plans, you know, or finding a spouse.
Mm-hmm.
We use the internet for everything
because
the internet does certain things really well. It doesn't do everything well, but
right.
what it does is connects people directly, and it bypasses middlemen, and it drives down costs, and it creates efficiencies, sometimes brutal efficiencies that maybe in a perfect world we don't even want. But that's what the internet does. And when I compared this terribly dysfunctional, terrible, that might be a little overstated, but this dysfunctional, very imperfect way that entrepreneurs have to raise capital, the internet is exactly what that system needed.
Mm-hmm.
The system needed entrepreneurs to be able to connect directly with investors, no middlemen. And so now in crowdfunding, if you're raising capital for that company, if you're the next Jeff Bezos raising that first $1 million, you can literally connect, no exaggeration, this afternoon, if you want to, with every investor on the whole planet.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what this click. It's the internet coming to the capital formation industry.
That's cool. Now, is there a certain type of crowdfunding that you focus on, regular A plus or CF, regular Reg D? What do you focus on mostly?
So I see from that question that you know about those different things.
Oh, yeah.
So that's good. So yeah, there are three different types. I focus on all three. I am almost every day involved in all three. But my practice, being a very good indicator of kind of the industry as a whole, so most of the volume of crowdfunding, as you probably know, is in Title II, Rule 506C, what you call Reg D crowdfunding.
Yep.
Those are all words for the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Accredited investors only. So that's where most of the volume is. The next greatest volume is in Title IV, or Regulation A or Regulation A+. Those also are words for the same thing. And that's where you can raise up to $50 million per year. Big deal, file with the SEC. So that's where the second greatest volume is, and where the second probably biggest portion of my practice is. Title III is the new animal on the block. You know, very limited amounts, very restrictive, very regulated, small companies. That is the newest thing, but the smallest volume,
right.
and will continue to be, and that's perfectly fine. And so for me, that represents, I do a lot of that work, but that's a smaller volume of work. So all three kinds, and each appropriate for a different business, and it all works together.
Now, do you find, so as an agency over here, I focus mostly on the smaller ones, right? The smaller startups. Do you find that it's, is it still traditional crowdfunding when you're starting to get into like raising $50 million, or is it just as small of a system in terms of who's investing in that? So what I deal with a lot with using platforms like WeFund or Republic and Start Engine, those types of platforms, is it's smaller companies, but even at that point, the pool of potential investors is quite small. The average person has no idea what equity crowdfunding is. They just look at me like, what, you know, oh, like Kickstarter is usually what the first thing that people respond to me. So do you find though that when you're up into like, the raising $50 million for, let's just say, a big real estate thing, is that, it's called crowdfunding to some degree, but is it really crowdfunding? Because a guy like me who's unaccredited, I'm not really participating in that sort of stuff. How do you sort of think about those kind of things as you're kind of looking at stuff?
Well, it's interesting you should ask that question, and interesting you should say that, because that's giving me market information that I didn't know. So just generically, sort of if you want to sound sophisticated at a cocktail party and someone says, well, what is crowdfunding really? And you can say, well, it's anytime you're raising money using the internet, that's crowdfunding. Makes you sound really cool, knowledgeable.
That's why I do what I do.
I know. I mean, yeah,
you're parties.
That's
it.
That is not a bad life goal, I will tell you. But to answer your question, yes, it is absolutely crowdfunding. So let's think about it in terms of the investor audience, right? I mean, the reason crowdfunding is so cool and so important from a socioeconomic point of view is that not only can entrepreneurs for the first time reach every investor on the planet, but ordinary Americans like you and like me for the first time can invest in these fabulous deals that historically have been reserved for the super rich. So, I mean, I'm an accredited investor, thank goodness, but even for me, and even as a lawyer who's been, representing real estate developers for decades, you just didn't get access to the deal quality. So Regulation A is absolutely for people like you. In fact, it is specifically for people like you, people who are looking for good deals, who are sort of aware of the investment universe, and who, because they aren't accredited, can't participate in all those wonderful deals, on Real Crowd and Crowd Street that are for accredited investors only. So yeah, the Reg A deals are fabulous deals. I mean, I say this as a lawyer who represents these folks, and does the deals. As an investor, I invest in these deals. They are terrific deals and absolutely are for you. So part of the investor education process is to demonstrate to people like you that Regulation A, it is not, the old way of raising $50 million is to go to a couple hedge funds in Manhattan and just, raise it from the billionaires. Okay. And that's where the money all used to come. Regulation A is pulling those deals from Manhattan into mainstream America and allowing people like you to participate. The people investing in those deals and the people participating in the Reg CF deals should be exactly the same people.
Yeah. What do you see, or how do you see us getting this conversation more into people's homes? Because again, I'm in it every day, and the amount of people who don't get it is shocking. And I know we're only about this May will be 3 years that it's right. Yeah.
Correct.
3 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So, how does this continue to become more and more of a mainstream thing, and to the point where it gets maybe as sexy as something like the Robinhood app or eTrader or, these sort of like app tech cool things, Acorn and all this other stuff? How does it get to that sort of level? Because that's something that currently we struggle with, is this education process and letting these platforms sort of mature a little bit more and getting more and more everyday people to understand it.
Well, I mean, that is probably the most important. You have just asked probably the most important question in the crowdfunding industry. Now, at the same time, you with your podcast are doing what needs to be done. You're doing a piece of it. I with my, I write this crowdfunding blog that is a piece of it. This is all about investor education, investor awareness. So partly, the investors, which mean all of us, investment habits tend not to be in a linear way. If you've ever herded sheep, which I also did on my Norwegian farm, you know that what happens, you're trying to get the sheep to go through a gate, they won't go, and then one goes, then boom, they all go.
Yeah.
And that tends to be how investors, what happens with investors too. Um, as people hear from their neighbors and their colleagues, wow, I invested in this deal and I actually did better than I did in my Vanguard, ETF fund. You're certainly going to start to see, and we are seeing more people participating. The number of people that participate has grown very, very rapidly, even if not as rapidly as some had hoped. But I think as an industry participant, it would be wrong and a little cowardly of me not, to pretend that, well, if those dumb members of the public would just understand this, they would invest, because the industry needs to do a better job. The process needs to be simpler, more transparent, more standardized. So if you're on this side of the lens, the industry side, and you look and you view the crowdfunding landscape, it looks great. But I always tell people when I speak at conferences, let's try looking through the investor end. And there it doesn't look
Yeah.
we are still as an industry in what I'd call beta version.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Big time.
And too. I mean, that if you sign up for some of these sites, and you mentioned a few, Republic, Start Engine and stuff, what you see there and how you see it is not necessarily very pretty.
Yeah.
Yeah. We need to do a much better job in terms of presentation, transparency, standardization, lots of other ways.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's going to happen, because look, it's just the internet. And once the internet comes to an industry, the travel industry, whatever it is, it doesn't go away.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the difference between the Amazon website of 1997 and Amazon's website today, and it's a very different animal.
Yeah. How do you, if since you're on the side of investing, how do you think it what are you looking for, right, on a project when you're looking at some of these platforms? Are you investing because you saw a Facebook ad, or they were great on Twitter, they emailed you? Like if one of these projects is getting into your universe, what's making you decide to pull the trigger? Is it just the bottom line, the numbers, or is it the story? What is it?
I think there are two kinds of crowdfunding investment, and this is to some extent, roughly speaking, a difference between, say, Reg CF on the one hand and Regulation A on the other hand. There are some companies that just you have a personal attachment to, and that's why the microbreweries have done so well.
Yeah.
A microbrewery is going to open in your town. You like craft beer, as I do.
Yeah.
And maybe they offer a reward. If you invest a certain amount of money, you get a new free beer every Thursday night, something like that. Maybe they don't, but you'd like it in your town. You think it's cool. So there are those kind of, personal interest stories, investments. Or on a more serious note, and there actually haven't been as many of these as I would have thought, but a company is trying to develop a new treatment for new therapy for cystic fibrosis, for example, breast cancer. Yeah. And you've been touched by that disease, either personally or a friend. And so, yeah, you say, what the heck, man? Let me participate. This is an important, meaningful thing. So there are those. Now, I'm just trying to make some money side, personally, what I look for is track record. And when I'm preparing legal documents for one of these things, I'm focusing on track record. What have you done in the past? How can we present that in the most effective way? And you get, and this is what I'm talking about. For example, I know of right now on the market a couple of multifamily Regulation A offerings with developers who over the last 15 or 20 years have just had a consistently terrific, stable track record. That's what I'm investing in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I'm not that smart. And I don't say that with false modesty. I say it with real modesty, like the guy, Winston Churchill remarked of someone, he's a very modest man and has much to be modest about. But I'm not an expert. I've been representing these folks for decades, but I really don't know how to pick real estate. So I think I'm in the same camp as most retail investors. So I want a track record. I'm going to believe that if a group has been doing it for 20 years, they probably know what they're doing.
Yeah. So I've got a two follow-up questions maybe to that. So the first one is, well, I'd love to get your take on this. So one of the things that I feel like I'm seeing as somebody who has sat on both sides of VC, getting some and, being a decision maker, I am finding that a lot of the platforms are losing or are out of touch with that handshake or personal touch that you're talking about. And we're seeing it quite a bit on the platforms I mentioned earlier, in terms of there still is this element of like, I need to see you. I need to know who you are. I'm not just going to put in $20,000 into a random website. This is not an Amazon purchase. This is, I need to know who you are. Right. And I think the portals aren't doing a very good job of that. Is that,
now that's interesting to me to hear you say that.
Yeah. Do you see, like, how do you feel in that, in regards to that? Is that something you've seen, or how do you feel about that when you're just going to a random website and going, let me just put some money in here in this? And some of the platforms are a little archaic too in that, where it's not smooth and then it's buggy and it's like, what am I doing here? And I'm wondering how you think about some of that sort of stuff.
Well, I think that's what makes real estate such an attractive, investment asset class for crowdfunding. Way back when crowdfunding began, as you might recall, because it does involve the internet, everyone, me included, thought this is going to be about high-tech companies.
Yep.
Cool websites, the next Facebook, blah, blah, blah. And then very brief, before things had gotten too far, in fact, I think before it was even legal, I actually wrote a blog post and I said, well, these companies like that are hard to invest in from 2,000 miles away because you don't get to shake hands. So, I think actually real estate might be a good candidate, and that has indeed turned out to be true. I totally agree with you. I have a hard time investing in an idea. Someone's idea, someone I don't know. I have a very hard time investing from 2,000 miles away in that company. If I don't, now again, if it's a cystic fibrosis therapy, maybe I do, because I just have a personal interest in that. But otherwise, I'm probably going to choose the multifamily deal.
Right. It's interesting. You keep mentioning like the cystic fibrosis or some sort of like medical, maybe, where it just seems like a no-brainer, right? Like, and I actually worked on a campaign that basically has a cure for leukemia, and it was not an amazing campaign. And we had investors. It should have been a home run. The track record was there. Everything was there. And I stood back on it, and I really started to realize that a lot of the communication I was getting, that there is a certain type of investor who invests in medical. They know the language. They know they just know that world. And I think that when I look back on this, when I look at our own, like, let's debrief ourselves here. Yeah. I found that's an investor type. And I'm wondering about some of these platforms, again, because we were using WeFunder. So you have a tech product thing, you have a movie studio thing, leukemia kind of thrown. It's like, whoa, that if it was a little bit more segmented, like, hey, this is medical, this is, and those type of investors were looking there, it might have done better. And I'm wondering if, like, have you seen anything along those lines? Because I kind of felt like I was nuts during the whole campaign, because I was like, we're solving leukemia. Like,
yeah, terrific question or issue to raise. Now, what kind of campaign? What type of crowdfunding?
So it was it was on WeFunder, so it was a title.
Title 3.
Title 3. Sorry, yeah, I was just brain farting there for a second, but yeah, Title 3.
were you able to, like, did you get the mailing list for the American Leukemia Society or anything like that?
So no, so as an agency, we found that whenever crowdfunding is involved, a lot of these companies, they get real skittish, where they just get like, whoa, you're raising money. We need
I
money.
think.
So and again, it's a fine line. And I still feel like, this is the Wild West right now for us too. So it's just like, well, let's see what these best practices look like. How do we frame this sort of stuff? So yeah, I mean, we wanted to, but we have found in the past that we just kind of run into brick walls on a lot of that.
Well, I think, in answer to your question, and I'm just speculating, so I think you were too early. And in fact, right at the beginning, there were a couple of two terrific Title II crowdfunding sites devoted specifically to medical.
Mm.
And I know at least one of them just failed completely, and I think the other one did too, because medical is really traditionally very, very hard. It's hard to interest professional investors in anything medical because it's a huge wait. The therapy's years and years and years to wait, no revenue, very capital intensive. And so with the benefit of hindsight, what had happened for them and probably happened to you is the larger retail public just wasn't paying attention.
Yeah.
You were only attracting, and these folks were only attracting the people who have always invested in those deals, and they're extremely picky.
Yep.
And they don't invest much.
Yeah.
So I think we just market per, the conversation we had earlier, the market just hadn't yet evolved to include enough ordinary Americans.
Yeah.
And I think it will, but when that happens, who the heck knows?
Yeah. Well, what if somebody's coming to you off the street and says, I've got, I don't know, a restaurant, a microbrewery, whatever they've got, what do you start telling them? What are the processes to kind of get this ball rolling? What are the expectations that you're setting up for them as to how to be successful?
The first thing I tell people is crowdfunding is not a technology business, or if you're in the restaurant, it's not the restaurant business. Crowdfunding is a marketing business. It is not build it and they will come. You have to be able to sell a story. And it's hard. And I know I'm speaking to the preaching to the choir here, but it is really hard to get people to write checks.
Yeah.
And so the first question is, I asked the company, do you have any reason to think you're going to be able to raise this money? I've had a lot of companies call me and they have a great business, but it's a boring business. It's a equipment manufacturer.
Yeah. Nothing sexy about it at all.
Nothing sexy, no story. They're not saving the bumblebees in Mexico or anything like that. And I tell them they're just probably not going to be successful yet. Again, will the market develop? Probably, but they're not going to be successful yet. So I want to have that conversation right away, because the last thing I want to do is take people's money, have their crowdfunding raise fail, and then they're unhappy and blah, blah, blah. So that's the first thing that we talk about. How much marketing dollars, people always want to know what's the legal fee, how much is it going to cost, and of course that's a legitimate question, and I tell them, but I also tell them, but the marketing cost is going to be multiples of that. And then the conversation goes, okay, you got a good story, you think you can raise money, it's an interesting company, it's a good financial story. What kind of crowdfunding should we use? That's a conversation I have pretty much every day. Should we use Title III? Should we use Title II? And if one of these makes some sense, where are you going to sell it? What's the distribution channel? Because as you know, there just aren't that many distribution channels. If it's real estate, there are a couple top sites. There are a few second-tier sites, what I would say. But as yet, the market has not developed in the way that I think it eventually will. I would have thought it would have happened by this time, where you'd have one site, for New York City commercial space, and this one for San Francisco office space, and all these different segments. It hasn't worked out that way yet. And if you're not talking about real estate, what's your distribution channel? There aren't many of them. And then, of course, there's the possibility, which many people choose, well, we'll do our own website. So those are the conversations. I want you to jump over some pretty high hurdles before you start spending money.
Right. How about in terms of like a timetable? What do you usually, they've checked off the boxes that you mentioned.
Okay.
But what do you start saying in terms of like, hey, you should be expecting this is 6 months, 5 months, a month? What do you start telling people to get them ready, for this campaign?
Well, the question that people ask me is, how long is it going to take for me to do all the legal stuff? And the answer that I always give them is, well, I can do it in a week if it has to be done in a week, but it usually takes a few weeks. Now, a Regulation A offering is a different story. Regulation A offering from soup to nuts is probably 5 months, but Title II, Title III, it's a matter of a few weeks. And they tell me, then they ask, well, how long will it actually take to raise the capital, once I'm live? And I say, well, I don't know, ask the portal. But, and you probably know the answer to that question as well as I do. Some deals get funded right away. Deals are being funded within hours. On the other end of the spectrum, I would say if a deal is not funded in 60 days, it's probably not going to be funded.
Yep.
So it's actually not, crowdfunding is not a real long, drawn out process relative to how long it used to take to raise capital back in the battled pre-crowdfunding days. But those are the general kinds of timelines.
Yeah, that's cool. So where do you see kind of what a year from now? I mean, again, we're only 3 years in. It still is. You use the word beta. I think that's a great way to describe it. Where do you sort of see like the next year, maybe 2 years going for equity crowdfunding? What do you see any big changes on the horizon, or is there any like SEC stuff that you're seeing come down the pipeline in terms of changes or things that you can and can't say in marketing wise? What do you see kind of coming down the road?
I do not see any significant legal or regulatory changes. I think the rules are going to stay about the same. I don't think the definition of accredited investor is going to change anytime soon. I don't think the Title III limits are going to be increased anytime soon. So no, I don't see big changes on the regulatory horizon. I think it's just going to be a steady growth as investors and entrepreneurs become, more and more aware. I back when we started, no one knew what crowdfunding was. Certainly weren't any podcasts about crowdfunding. So we've come a long way, but as you know, you can still stand up in front of a room and have people not know what equity crowdfunding is. So, can you stand in front of a room today and have nobody know what a mutual fund is, right? Everyone knows what mutual funds are. So there's a big distance. And I think that is just going to be a market-driven, incremental process. I do think, because it's just the internet, that within 5 years, I think certainly on the real estate side, anyone looking for capital is going to think about crowdfunding first. That's not going to be just some bizarre choice. It's just, you want to make an airline reservation today. What do? You go online. And I think And even on a less serious side, if you're single and you looking to not be single, what do you do today?
Yeah.
You know,
Get an app. Go get an app.
you go get a bunch of apps.
Yeah,
So I think that's how this industry is going to evolve. I don't know what it's going to look like. I don't know what the version, if we're in beta now, I don't know what version 3.0 looks like. I have, from a lawyer's perspective, some ideas what it should look like, what it could look like. But I don't know. Right now we are, even though it's all internet based, we are still using paper paradigms, right? You you go and look at these deals, and it's a 150-page PDF, and that, if you think about it, that's really nonsensical.
Yeah.
The capabilities are so much greater in terms of access to information and all the things that you can do visually using the technology. I mean, we're talking to each other here.
Right.
And
yeah. I mean, one of the biggest ones I get, and one of my I run a dad's beer night, and one of my dads that go to it is a SEC lawyer, right? So I pick his brain all the time, and I've been meeting with him because I have a healthy amount of international clients that are calling me trying to do equity crowdfunding, and I just, man, like, I don't know the rules for every country, and you're in Australia. I don't even know how we could figure out a way. Have you, do we move your business here somehow? So we're trying to find ways to, like, how do we make this easier? Because it really should be a global thing. If again, should be. I understand it probably will never be, but whatever it might be, but we're having those conversations of like, well, how could we at least approach this and make this possibly happen?
Yes. So it will look a lot different than it looks today. It will be better in version 3.0, but I'm not exactly sure what that's going to look like. I'm sure that it's coming. I have no doubt about that. I don't think it's going to be blockchain driven.
Yeah, I don't either.
The whole crypto blockchain thing, I think, has, in the short term, has really been an impediment to the crowdfunding world because it has diverted everyone's attention. Like, we're trying to build this house, we got the foundation in, we're putting in the first floor, and then suddenly, wow, look at that thing across the street. Look at that solar eclipse. Let's focus on, let's only look at that.
I hear you.
And so even these companies, as you know, Start Engine, for example, is kind of pivoted.
I know.
Now we're a blockchain company.
I know. I get a gazillion calls of companies who are struggling over there because I'm like, I don't know what you're blockchaining an app for some shopping thing. I don't know.
And, yes. and now maybe it will come. Technology jumps all around. It's not linear in the world history of technology. So maybe somehow the blockchain will come back and have a benefit for the crowdfunding world per se. But it has temporarily really diverted attention away from just basic fundamental capital formation.
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely. It's good to know that I'm not nuts. Sometimes I sit over in Detroit here and I think I'm nuts about some of these things, but hey, you're having some of the same conversations.
Oh, no.
It's good to hear. It's validation. But so, what about on like the marketing side? What are you, I struggle with this because I'm trying to make sure I'm always compliant with everything and what I'm putting on a Facebook and, an email, Instagram, what I'm saying and what I'm not saying. Where do you see that sort of world continuing to lighten up, or do you see, I feel like the SEC is still trying to catch up, just they're not, the rules are being wrote for what we were doing on the internet 2 years ago. And as a guy who does most of the marketing in terms of Facebook ads and using emojis and animation videos, trying to tell this story, sometimes you get the hand slapped a little bit because you're trying to, like, again, weave your way through this. How do you tell clients about this? How do you talk about it in terms of like, hey, this is the world we're in right now for marketing?
Well, I mean, I talk about marketing a lot. And that's one of the benefits of, Rule 506C or Title II crowdfunding, because, man, in that world, you can do anything, all that stuff. There's, sometimes when I'm moderating a panel of lawyers, I'll say, okay, now tell me what kind of advertising is not allowed in Title II. And everyone, what did you say? And it's a trick question because the answer is none. Really? You can do anything.
God, I didn't even know that one. That's interesting.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So the Title III world and the Title IV world are different. I do think the Title III advertising rules are really needlessly complicated. So, as you know, there's this rule that if you mention any of 4 things, then your advertisement has to be really limited. Mm-hmm. And those 4 things don't make any sense. Yeah. Like when our offering closes.
Right.
Is that like super important information? Or are we selling common stock or preferred stock? That's one of the 4 terms of the offering. That doesn't make any sense. Mm-hmm. And it would be nice if the SEC kind of got rid of that rule. Now, within those rules, I actually think I represent a bunch of Title III portals, and they will ask me, what about this? Can we do this? I find there's always a way. There's always an effective way to advertise, even without crossing those ridiculous boundaries. But I do wish those boundaries would be taken down. Title IV, I actually get most of the advertising questions about. Title IV is a world in which most entrepreneurs do not feel comfortable at the outset. It's the world of big company securities regulation. Mm-hmm. And you really do have to be very, very careful. And the marketing people get so angry with me because, here, Mark, here's our draft website. What do you think? And I go, no, you can't say that. You can't say that. So it is certainly, it's a transition for your typical entrepreneur to go from the wild west, which is Title II, to Regulation A, which is big company Wall Street rules. Now, crowdfunding is a marketing business. I think there's so much opportunity in the crowdfunding world for marketing expertise. Mm-hmm. There's a few players in that world now, but man, that's where all the action is.
Yep.
Telling the story, being effective communication. If I were starting and you told me, well, in the crowdfunding world, do you want to be a lawyer or a marketing guy? I'd probably say a marketing guy.
Yeah, that's why I'm on my side, because I think it's just going to get more and more. And I'm getting, I mean, for us in particular, we have a lot of portals reaching out because I think the portals, well, they did a good job of, getting everything built behind the scenes, dashboards and all the tech side of that stuff. And then they, some of them did a great job of getting pools of investors to actually invest on the platform. But all of them forgot about marketing. I've been a part of 3 portals that just died because I was like the Winston Wolfe of Pulp Fiction, like, save our portal. Like, we got all these campaigns, but nothing's funding. It's like, you literally just launched them. You didn't,
yes.
You didn't do any, that's not the actual work,
No.
So like on our end, I think we're starting to see the portal starting to understand that they have to do a better job of educating the businesses that it is not we launched, we built it, they'll come type of vibe.
Yeah, no, it is not. You really got
to put that time in. So like when people ask me, I can answer my own question I asked you when they ask me how long it is. I'm like, you got to give me like 3 to 5 months to go and tell a story and get people excited. And the paperwork is, all right, 2 weeks, like you said,
Yeah.
I don't know. We hit the launch button when we're ready, but that's not the work. The work is all this other stuff. And I think, well, I know a couple portals that have literally, we have conversations weekly now that they're like, oh yeah, we're getting it. We gotta do a better job. And they've, a lot of them too, they've tapped their investor pools too much too, where it's just like, yes. Hey, we have 14,000 investors. Well, they can't, if you got 200 projects a week going up, that like they're checking out. You go find some more investors. You got to go do these things. So we're seeing that on our end here. Is just, it's the marketing side is.
And are these portals starting to spend more money on marketing?
Not quite. They're asking the
Not
clients to do it. Yeah, because I think that they're well. Some of them, if I'm not mistaken, you can tell me if I'm pretty sure I'm familiar on this. Like Title III, they can't technically, right? They can't
I don't
actually
know.
promote a company, right?
They can't promote a company to the exclusion of other companies, but
Yeah.
they can promote their own brand.
Right. But yeah, and that's been the sticky point. So what we've been having some conversation is that some portals are running Facebook ads only for certain projects. And I'm going, whoa. You could promote
Yeah.
yourself, right? But I don't know if you should be running Facebook ads particularly for clients. And I learned this from the Kickstarter days, because that's why Kickstarter basically was they have a projects we love, but they're not out running ads for like the best one of their products that they love more than it's not a fair balance.
Well, what you can't be doing is, that's a whole legal conversation. You can't be giving investment advice. And if you're saying or implying, listen, of all the companies on our site, we think this is going to most likely to be successful. You cannot do that.
Yeah.
You can randomly pick a company, our Tuesday special of the week,
Mm-hmm. Right.
Things like this. But anyway, and to your point earlier, not sure it makes sense for anybody that portals have to think about these rules. And most portals probably need to be better capitalized than they are today.
I had one where I was like, a company that was calling me was probably like 10 times more funded than the platform. I was like,
that doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make any sense. You're not, so we're barking up the wrong tree here. I think I pushed him to somebody else, but yeah, there's a ton, man. We could probably talk all day on this. So where can people like dive in more to your world, read your blogs, connect with you? How do people connect with you and stuff?
Well, people find me all sorts of ways, but I will give you my blog address, which is, it is crowdfund and then attny.com. So I won't spell it again. Crowdfund, kind of abbreviation for attorney, attny.com. Our technology department recently put this device on my desk that apparently if you press the following numbers, this device rings. It's a telephone. And my telephone number is 856-661-2265. So, or you type my name into Google with crowdfunding, Mark Roderick crowdfunding, you will find it. I hope so. You will find it pretty easily.
Yeah, well, I'll put this information too. So if anybody's listening, you want to go to the website that this is hosted on, I'll have all that info in there so that we can get those direct links to you. But Mark, I appreciate you taking time out of your day. This was a great conversation and
great conversation.
I always love this stuff when I can learn stuff too. So this was great. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much, Mark. Bye now.